The first step for valuations analysis is understanding the business model, how and when your project earns revenues and accrues expenses. This varies greatly by project, but generally the components are operating revenue, direct expenses, and operating expenses. We'll examine each of these one at a time. Operating revenue is generated directly from your product or service. For a consumer product, like a cup of coffee, revenue equals the number of units or cups sold times the price per unit. In contrast, for a subscription product, like music streaming, revenue includes other components. Enrollment and churn rates affect the number of subscribers, and revenues might come from both subscriptions and advertising. Of course, revenue can also take many other forms for different consumer and commercial products. Direct expenses are expenses directly related to the good or service we offer and scale with them. The more we produce, the greater the expense. For example, the cost of goods sold, like coffee cups and coffee beans, is a direct cost. This can also include servicing costs like labor directly related to production. In contrast, operating expenses, or overhead, are necessary to run our business but not directly tied to production. A standard example is sales, general, and administrative costs, also called SG&A, such as advertising or the salary of a staff accountant. Another type of operating expense is wear and tear on equipment. While this is related to production, it's not a direct expense since it doesn't scale directly with the units produced. Note that the timing of our revenues and expenses is on an accrual basis. This means we recognize revenue as it's earned versus paid, and expenses concurrently with the revenue that they support. For example, we might purchase raw materials months before selling their output, but we would align our per unit cost of goods sold with the month that the sale of the final output occurred. Now, let's start putting things together. Gross profit is simply operating revenue minus direct expenses. You may be wondering, what happened to our overhead expenses? Don't worry, we will talk more about these in the next video. Throughout this course, we will write functions to perform our financial calculations. This way, we can focus on the outputs rather than the arithmetic. To do so, let's assume our business assumptions exist in a data frame, like the assumptions data frame shown here, with one column to denote time and another column for each key assumption. A function consists of a header describing the function name and inputs, and a body containing the code to execute. We've already written the gross margin calculations, so let's turn them into a function. The body should look familiar from before. What's new is the code wrapping around it. We give our function a name, Calc Business Model, and use the left arrow to assign this to a function. Inside the function keyword, we specify any inputs to our function. That is, any values that the code inside the function body needs to execute. When we use this function, it will take the arguments we pass in and run the internal code with them. There's just one other difference. At the end, we need to return something to the external environment so our work can be captured and not lost. To do this, we add a new line to the code body to print the resulting model data frame. Finally, we can call our function on our assumptions dataset to start building out the lines of our cash flow statement. Now it's your turn. In the following exercises, you'll model different business scenarios and encapsulate your code as